Hello, hello, and welcome. If you are out there live and you are watching, let us know in the chat that you are here. I'm LeeAnn Mallorie. I'm going to be your host for our conversation today. And really, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be digging into another conversation about what might be a value or a shadow in your leadership. So, again, if you're out there, you're in the chat, let me know so that I know if you can hear me. We'll get started in just a moment. All right, chat is fairly quiet, but I'm going to go ahead and dive in as I know that we are streaming and there may be folks who also would like to watch later. First of all, thank you for taking the time to be here now live if you're here live, or thank you for taking the time if you are joining us later and watching this recording. As I said already, I'm LeeAnn Mallorie, founder of Guts and Grace Leadership, where we help women leaders tap into the wisdom of their bodies so that they can thrive both at home and also at work. What does that mean to tap into the wisdom of our bodies? It's not necessarily just about resilience. It's actually about our presence. It's about being able to really understand, see, and feel who we're being as leaders from the inside out. And this series, we're calling our Values and Shadows series, is really an opportunity to go deeper into how to leverage this aspect of ourselves to understand what is behind the things that we most want to embody or we most want to avoid embodying, both again at work and at home. This is an interesting time for this conversation. I would say there's a lot of folks who are teaching right now, somatics or training, embodiment and leadership. I've been doing this work since about 2007 and coaching women leaders since about 2005. So my intention with this series isn't just to give you like a tiny bite of something or a little taste or a tiny practice, but actually much more an opportunity to go deeper in reflection. So we're not going to be doing a 2-minute practice here, although there will be an opportunity to feel some things in your body. We are going to open potentially a fairly large Pandora's box because I think that actually matters for us to understand how deeply we can use these tools to transform something in our leadership. So we'll take about 30 minutes here to tackle the embodiment and mindset behind, as we've been doing in this series, either a value or something that we might call a shadow. And I think today we might be talking about both. So today's topic is, do I really need validation? If I were to give it an alternative topic, I might have said something like, see me, don't see me, or I want to be seen, I don't want to be seen. There's a lot of conversation in the women's leadership realm around this idea of not getting seen or not being recognized for my efforts in the workplace and also elsewhere. And the question is, of course, that can heighten our need for, or our sense of our need for validation. But I'd like to take a closer look at, is that really what we need, or is in fact that a shadow? And that it might be different, in fact, depending upon the person's build, where they're at in their career, and how things end up playing out. Before we dive in too deeply, I do want to name that we are coming together here for learning, as I mentioned already, on the deeper side. It can be tempting to multitask, to have lots of windows open, to be doing this as well as something else at the same time. Instead, I really invite you, if this topic is important to you, to close your windows and optimize your time. Although I often say if you want to take a walk or do something like with your hands, wash dishes, knit, seriously, things that actually are more kind of getting you in your body while you're listening, that can also work. But I will invite you at a couple different moments to write some things down. So if you would like to have yourself available for writing, that can be helpful as well. Okay, so let's talk about validation. Do I really need it? What does it mean? Is it serving me? Is it not serving me in my career as I continue to grow as a leader? What is validation in the first place? If we look at the definition of validation, we see things like the action of checking or proving the validity or accuracy of something, checking or proving that something is accurate. Now, of course, that's not exactly how we tend to use it in leadership. If we're talking about validation in this sense, it might be more like recognition or affirmation, that something is valid, that something is worthwhile, could be that something's acceptable, for example. So already you can see as you start to hear these definitions that there's something outside of ourselves that we're looking for, using to decide, are we okay? Are we on the right track? Is this good? Is this not good? Is this acceptable? Is it not acceptable? Am I good, not good, acceptable, and so forth? If you think about the last time that you needed to or felt the need to check out your validity or prove yourself or get affirmation or get validation from someone, you might kind of have a clue as to what this world is like for you. And the question that I'm posing is, do we really need this? Now, my sincere answer is maybe and sometimes, but I want to give you a chance to really explore it for yourself because your answer may be different. Let's start by taking stock of where you stand about it. So, again, think about for a moment a time when, maybe a recent time, you felt you needed to prove yourself, you were checking out your own validity, or looking to get affirmation from someone. It may be a time at home, it may be a time at work. If you're trying to evolve in your leadership, I really invite you to consider a time at work. And if you're willing, grab a journal, get something to write with, and answer this question: why do you need it? Or why did you need it in this case? And whether you believe you do or don't need it, I want to give you the invitation to write three, four, maybe five answers, or to think about three, four, maybe five answers to this question. Why do you need validation? So take a moment, think on that, write on that. Sometimes I like to say first thought, best thought, whatever comes to mind. It could be a word, a couple of words. Why do you need validation? If I were writing this list, I might say things like, to have a sense that I belong, or to know that I'm on the right track, for example. All right, now take the other side of the coin. And again, regardless of what you believe, let's take a minute and answer this question: why don't you need validation? Here again, three answers, four answers, five answers. Even if you think you do, see if you can answer the question, why don't you? And see what comes through. All right, so validation, why we may need it, what might be needed about it. And then on the other hand, why perhaps we don't need it. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the two different sides of the coin of this question. And I've already alluded to it a little bit, but I'm gonna share just a couple of stories to give you examples, and I'm gonna invite you to really feel into this for yourself and see what resonates for you. So here's an example. Let's say, for example, a number of years ago, I was working with a client who was a leader in sustainability in the fashion industry. And in her experience at work, she would find herself getting frustrated when she'd make a recommendation to her colleagues and they would push back on her. Her frustration would show, and she'd end up getting defensive, and then they'd end up getting defensive, even though she actually had a lot of really good skills at communication and negotiation and stakeholder management. Nonetheless, this kind of tussle would ensue. So over time, she started to get a reputation that rather than lean into collaboration, people would start to avoid meeting with her or avoid their conversations with her. So in her particular case, in the moment of bringing something to one of her colleagues that she needed to get on board, there was a sense of kind of they don't buy it. I don't understand why they don't agree with me. And really we could call that a moment of needing a certain kind of validation to be able to then go into the next piece of the conversation, which would have been, let's say, negotiating about how and when and are we going to collaborate on it and what's going to unfold from here. So it was really that moment of here's my idea, here's what I think we should do, here's the lead that I'm trying to take, and then that validation not happening exactly in that moment. Interestingly, in this particular case, I would say the need for validation started to break down her capacity to get ahead and really began to wreak havoc in her relationships. Now, Would you have thought of this as initially as a situation or a conversation about validation? Maybe not, right? We could say, well, someone got triggered or, they don't really care, these kinds of things. But ultimately, there was a moment where the conversation was moving forward and a moment where it started to break down. And it was actually that precise moment where her idea, her thing she was asking for that she was passionate about, that mattered to her, that she needed perhaps to move forward, even to succeed at her job, didn't click for the person. And instead of then being able to unpack it, have a useful conversation, the whole thing would start to spiral downhill when they would not give her the immediate, yes, I agree with you, that's important at the start. So it actually prevented them from being able to get to a win win. And this can be one way that a need for validation can play out in a more shadowy or not that helpful way inside of an organization. Question for you as you're listening to this story: in what ways do you perhaps see yourself here? Do you relate to her story? Are there moments for you where something like this has ensued and you kind of go, yeah, I can see why she would want that. I can see what the need would be, but also perhaps what the cost would be. There are lots of ways this side of the coin can look. And for the sake of our exploration, I want to call this side of the coin chasing validation, grasping for, going after, needing it to be able to take a next step. It can show up in our behavior in leadership in lots of different ways. For example, it can show up like showing off, proving, or over showcasing something. I do it more, I do it better. I want to be sure that they saw me. I ask questions, for example, checking in a bunch to see how it's going. Was that good? Did you like it? Did you see it? How did I do? These kinds of checking in type questions are kinds of ways of relating. It can also look like this sort of chasing validation can look like doing things you shouldn't be doing, saying yes to something perhaps you should have said no to because you actually want to get the glory or the accolade, or in some way, there's I need to say yes to this to feel like I'm okay or I'm getting there. It can look like getting mad or resentful when you're not acknowledged or being seen. Now, none of us really like to talk about these kinds of things, and probably we wouldn't raise our hand and be like, yes, I do that. But if you're honest with yourself, have you had experiences where you're not getting acknowledged or seen and you're feeling internally and or expressing anger, resentment, etc., etc.? Not that you shouldn't be, right? These are your feelings. There might be very valid reasons why you have them, but this can be a part of a mechanism that is designed to keep grasping for or chasing that validation. It can also look like, interestingly, holding something back if you're worried about being rejected or misunderstood. So, because I really want the validation, I'm not going to show all of my cards, or I'm not going to risk not getting it at some point in time. But we'll talk more about that on the other side. Okay, so if you relate to any of those behaviors, you might be in the shadow side of this conversation around chasing or needing validation. Is that bad? Not necessarily, but it might not totally be working for you, or it might be wreaking havoc in different ways in your ability to advance, make the kind of impact you want to make, move things forward, create the win win, as I mentioned with my client. Now, there are a lot of reasons why we do this, especially, let's say, if we're talking about women's leadership, since it's one of our core focuses at Guts and Grace, especially if we have worked in or are currently working in organizations where real sexism, real discrimination was at play or is at play right now. It makes a lot of sense that we would find ourselves consciously or unconsciously engaging in behavior of this kind or feeling internally these ways. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm saying it may, though, be part of a shadow, or it might be making it harder to actually get where you want to go in terms of building your reputation, building your confidence, etc. For many of my clients, we find these types of behaviors. I certainly have them in different ways still myself. And part of my ongoing work is to continue to catch myself in the act and really ask the question, what is this serving? Is it fully centered? Or is it actually something that's trying to serve a function that isn't helpful right now? While these behaviors may make sense, they may be justified, In some cases, they might actually be getting in your way or creating what we could call a self fulfilling prophecy. When I am checking in a bunch to see how it's going, it might be that it actually produces, for example, a consideration about how it's going in the eyes or in the thoughts of the person I'm checking in with. Okay, well, I thought it was going well, but now you're asking me, maybe it isn't going that well. Let me do a double take or let me look again or something like that, right? So it can create a certain kind of spin that doesn't necessarily lead to you getting ultimately acknowledged or being really seen for what you're actually bringing. Same thing with a behavior more like proving or over showcasing. Again, not things that we like to admit. Maybe we don't even totally see that we do this. But if I'm coming with an energetic of push or an energetic of perform, it may be that actually it comes across as, for example, less secure, less grounded, less sure, less whole, less capable than if I were otherwise more centered and not in that particular type of grasp or type of push. Okay, I hope this makes sense. Often, when we're working with this, we're actually looking at, first of all, beginning to just see and name something. This tends to eventually open a path, even if I'm not sure, like, what can I do different? Should I do something different? Even if I feel justified in why I'm doing the thing the way that I'm doing it, or I don't know how to change it, or I can't help it. It tends to open the possibility of, for example, sometimes a bit of healing, but also more comfort with oneself over time because I'm willing to say, I'm willing to look, I'm willing to name. This is part of how I try to get love. I try to get attention. I try to get seen. I try to get somewhere. When we start to talk about it, when we start to, at least with ourselves, maybe with a coach, someone that we trust. In some cases, if you have a great organization and a good boss, it might be you can actually name this with your boss and find your way through it to something that is in fact more whole and more sustainable underneath. Ultimately, as we start to work with this, it can increase one's confidence and decrease the need for validation. Often, as we start to soften these behaviors, step out of them, let them go, interestingly, we may find ourselves getting more seen and more accolades than we expected when we were feeling the need to grasp. All right. Does this resonate for you? This is the question. I want to give you a moment to, in your own body, let's say in our embodiment, explore what is this like for me? Maybe I do or I don't relate to it. So let's try it on. If you want, you can close your eyes and just take a couple of deep breaths and bring your awareness down into the sensations in your body. So feel for a moment. Maybe you feel some of this already right now because you're coming out of a meeting or something just happened at work, depending on when you're watching this. But if you're not, I invite you to actually remember, as I said earlier, a moment in time when you felt like you weren't getting it and maybe you were in this grasping mode. Perhaps you were performing, leaning in, checking in, feeling nervous, getting mad or resentful, saying yes to something, doing any one of these things. If you can remember a moment in time where that was so, maybe it was yesterday, maybe it was earlier in your career, let yourself feel, like put yourself back in that moment and let your body kind of do without performing, like let your body go to that place and let your body do a little bit of what it does or did in that moment. I really wanted, I really got frustrated about, I really was looking for. And here's how that lives in me. I notice as I'm speaking to you about it, I lean forward a little bit. My eyes kind of get out of their sockets or like extended forward. There's a pull that's a little bit out of my own center. You might feel many things. Maybe you feel your, defenses or your haunches are up. Maybe there's a tingliness or an anxiety that starts to show itself. So just give yourself a minute. Oh, this is what it's like when I'm in this body, when I'm in this me. And take a deep breath. If you want, shake it off. And if you want to take any notes, feel free to take a few notes. Okay, so the shadow side of validation, the not so helpful, maybe this is part of what I'm running that actually isn't helping me express myself fully, get to the next level. be as fully empowered or embodied in my leadership as I could be. We all have some version of this, I believe. I certainly do. Useful to be willing to take a look, to name it, to get to know it, to know when it's driving, rather than, well, not so. Okay, that could be the end of this life. However, there's really, I would say, another side of the coin because of what I already said. Because if we're looking at women in leadership or diverse folks in leadership, certainly if we have, again, worked in or are working in organizations where sexism, discrimination, racism is at play, there are probably also ways that we've contended with the system and things that we may need now that actually like receiving validation, especially if it's not coming from a grasp, but more coming from a let it in and it's actually authentic, can be very nourishing and supportive of the growth and healing process. So it's not like, oh, looking for trying to get validation is always going to take me down a shadow road, is always going to take me somewhere I don't want to go. There is another version of the story. Let me give you another example. So, another client that I worked with a number of years back was the executive director of a nonprofit law firm. She had great ideas, but she had really learned to turn them down because she'd served as number two to the founder in this organization for a number of years. So she developed this way of being where instead of speaking her mind, she'd get kind of excited. She'd start to share about what she was thinking or what she was seeing or envisioning. And then at some point, she'd kind of tone it down and start to say something like, never mind, I don't really know. She'd change the subject. She wouldn't finish her thought. And in our work together, there were a number of moments where just simply pausing and validating that there was something for her that she was bringing forward that mattered was actually very supportive. It eventually helped her begin to build the muscle to stay in the game and take more risks. And we trained her team to do the same with her, to be able to catch her in that moment of disappearing, of shutting down, of not fully bringing herself forward, and offer at that moment a pattern interrupting piece of validation. For example, a reflection, some praise and appreciation and acknowledgement that started to create a cycle of her being more and more willing to risk, to trust, and to bring herself forward. This led to some really big results for both her and for the organization. So if you think about yourself in this kind of a moment, do you have a memory of or a situation where you can relate to this? Yes, a time when maybe a mentor or a friend or a coach or someone offered the right kind of validation at the right moment where it really met me in something that was hard for me to receive or stay in. And it actually helped me stay in the game versus just, let's say, stroked my ego or, met my shadow in some way. So this is the other side of the coin around validation. Some of us will have embodied habits and patterns that are more avoidance of validation and not being able to let this nourishment in versus reaching for, striving for, or grasping for. What that can look like: turning down compliments, shutting down in the face of a risk like the client I just described, maybe spacing out or losing my clarity or losing my center. It can also look like over humility or even false humility. I'm not that good at that, this kind of a thing. Can also, other side of the coin, look like getting pushy or mad or upset or a lot of emotion, especially after you perform or do something well, but before the acknowledgement, the praise or validation comes in, because it can distance you from receiving the impact of what you actually did or created. So for some of my clients, they actually need to let in validation more and more fully to be able to take the next step in their professional growth. And so on this side of the coin, we might say validation is actually a gift. Validation can be much more of a value or something that we are able to engage with in a positive way to really move ourselves forward. So it depends is really the answer to, do I really need validation? In this case, it might be actually quite uncomfortable to let it in because it's going right to the heart of a place that you've shut something down or turned something off. Many of us will have both versions of these patterns. And so, again, the answer to do I need validation becomes a bit more like, a puzzle to solve for, or something that actually really you have to unpack in any given moment. Is it that I'm chasing and actually not letting it in, or kind of not chasing it anymore might be healthy or helpful? Or is it actually that I'm running away from it, I'm avoiding it, I'm not able to fully receive it, and calibrating myself to be able to receive more of it is actually the next piece of my growth. So it depends on our calibration, meaning how we're already at in terms of this compass. It depends on our history, our experiences. It depends on what we currently wear as our embodied habits and patterns around how we navigate or engage with validation. So, as is often the case when I'm doing this type of work, the answer is both and both and or neither, but depending upon the situation. All right. So, if you have stayed this long, I invite you to take a moment to reflect for yourself. When it comes to validation, do you tend to chase or avoid it? Do you tend to be on one or the other side of this coin? And pick a domain. Yes, at work, let's say I tend to roll more this way or that way. And the second question, what is working about that? Or what isn't working about that so well? All right. So, as in any great coaching conversation and or uh, training, I like to leave you with some homework. And your homework at first is not to change anything, because often we move too fast and we try to solve the wrong problem. So, rather than change anything based on what you've heard up until this moment, I want to invite you to spend about a week observing yourself with compassion in relation to your relationship with validation. Do you seek it? Do you avoid it? How do you do that? What's it like in your body when you're in that mode? What happens to your presence? Where do your thoughts go? What is your kind of way of engaging with someone when these moments come up? Are there specific kinds of moments that actually really show you this pattern or show you your relationship? I invite you to take notes and really let yourself be in learning mode here. As you be with this over the course of a week, you can start to ask yourself the questions: how is this serving? How's it maybe not serving? What am I learning? Is there something that I might want to change? But don't change it right away. Let yourself get familiar with the paradigm for you before you go and start to make a change. Okay, I hope this gives you something juicy to work with over the course of this week or maybe the rest of your life. What I have found is that when a woman leader in particular does the work to really get to know this part of herself, it starts to open the door, because there's a lot of advice out there. Here's what I should do. Here's what you should do. Do this or do that to get to the next level. Do this or do that to build your confidence. And yet, what will actually help you depends on your current calibration, and validation is one piece of the puzzle that actually starts to unlock the potential for a different kind of more resilient confidence. And confidence, we know, is often something that we're in conversation about. Most likely, I'll do another session about confidence in particular very soon. For now, though, I want to give you this kind of meaty piece of exploration to be in. And as you do it, remember to keep feeling, paying attention to your body as the doorway to more information about what is true for you, and therefore what might open the door for you. All right. So, a couple more notes before we close. You may know this already if you've been tracking me for a while. At Guts and Grace Leadership, we run a year-long coaching and mastermind program that is for women in leadership who are ready to start cracking the glass ceiling. I like to say from the inside out, meaning what are some of the ways that we've taken on, internalized the patriarchy, behaviors, ways of being that aren't necessarily serving us to get to our next level of leadership. And we do work inside of this program to support you to identify, to get to know how your own nervous system works, to understand your own calibration, and therefore hone in on the very specific, often simple, but maybe not easy moves that you can make that will really open a door in some way for you. If you would like to find out if this work could be helpful for you, I'd be delighted to speak with you. We offer a free coaching discovery call, which is an opportunity to get to know us and also for us to get to know you and offer some specific advice on the challenges you're facing right now, but also explore, if you would like, whether this work can take you to your next level. So please feel free to reach out. I will make sure that that is in the show notes for this session, as well as I think you can see it here now. And if you have other questions, just let me know. I hope this was helpful. Have a great rest of your day.